today's card's going to be a sort of thinking of you in sympathy card. And for that I'm going to be using this basic grey Capella paper pad. I'm going to be using these three colours from the paper pack, and I've got some slightly off-white grey, I guess, cardstock for the base card. For this background I'm going to be using this stamp. This is the Hero Arts Cling stamp and it's called the Antique Brocade. Unfortunately, it's a little bit too small for this base card because what I want to do is create like a wide strip of this border. So what I'm going to need to do is use this stamp-a-ma-jig to ensure I can create two stamps in a row that are perfectly lined up, and I'll show you how I do that just now. Okay, so to set up your stamp-a-ma-jig, what you need to do is get your imaging sheet and your stamp-a-ma-jig. Push the imaging sheet into the corner of your stamp-a-ma-jig. Then get your stamp, which is mounted on your block, and just stamp by pushing your block in the same way as you did with your imaging sheet and just stamp an impression down onto that imaging sheet. It's not a great impression, but it doesn't matter because it's going to serve my purpose. Then we can start to stamp our background. So I'm going to re-ink my stamp and stamp my first impression down on the paper. And press it really well in to make sure I get a good impression. And as you can see, it's really subtle tone on tone effect, that grey ink on the grey cardstock. Then I need to re-ink my stamp. Get the Stamp-a-ma-jig image and line it up with the image that you've already stamped on your page. Once you're happy with the placement, you can go ahead and get your Stamp-a-ma-jig and line that up into the corner of the imaging sheet again. And then hold that in place and then stamp your stamp again. Make sure this is exactly the same orientation as you had. You're holding your block in exactly the same way as you did when you pressed that first stamp in. Anyway, just stamp that down again, press it down really well to make a good impression. And you can see then that's perfectly in line. Even though it's not a continuing pattern, technically, the eye can barely tell that because you've made such a good line and these are all parallel. So just clean off your sheet. Okay, so our base card is nearly done. I'm going to now move on to the flower. For that I'm going to use my Cuttlebug and this Tim Holtz alteration dies. And it's the tattered floral die. Now I've not used this before. First of all, I want to cut this big flower out in this pattern paper here. And I just want this one flower, so I've cut out this corner of this bit of pattern paper just so it doesn't cut the entire sheet because I don't need all of them in this pattern. Okay, so my stack is as follows. My B plate plus the Tim Holtz die, and then my cutting B plate on top of that to make the sandwich. And there's my first flower. I'm then going to cut the slightly smaller flower in this big floral pattern here. So again, I've got my B plate, my Tim Holtz die, a bit of paper, and then my cutting B plate, and I'm just going to run that sandwich through. And my last one, I'm just going to be doing this small flower here. In fact, I'm going to cut this one and this one because I don't know which one I want. Okay, so now I've got my flower pieces. What I need to do is add some dimension to them. And for that, I use my piercing mat and my thick-tipped sort of dry embossing tool. And all I'm going to do, I'll show you on this one because it's probably easier for this one, is turn my die cut over and then just use a circular motion on the leaves. In each petal I'm going to do exactly the same thing, and as you can see, doing this kind of breaks up the strands in the paper, and it curls the paper just ever so slightly. So it's just the fibres give slightly in the paper. And this just gives a bit of dimension to your flower. It would otherwise just be a really flat flower. This makes it three-dimensional. and you get a nice 3D flower. I'm going to go ahead and do that to these two as well. Okay, once you've added the dimension to the flowers, you then need to build the flower. And for these, I'm going to use one of these pearl brads. You just need to punch a hole in each of these 3 flowers. So I'm going to use my crocodile to do this, but you can use just a hole punch or whatever you have to hand. I'm just going to punch a hole in each of the centres of these flowers, which just makes it a lot easier to thread the brads through. And then just kind of open these, the ends of the brad on the back. Once I've done that, I just kind of play with the flower to kind of bunch it up a little bit, ruffle it, just to give it a bit of added 3 dimensions. It's going to be a really super simple card. All I'm going to do here is just put with Deepest Sympathy, and for that I'm going to use this stamp set from Woodware, and it's called Jane's Script. Yeah, Jane's Script. And I'm just going to ink that up in a slightly darker grey ink. I'm just going to stamp that into the bottom right hand corner of the card. Just to finish up this flower, just to kind of make it pop off that background a little bit more, I'm just going to distress it with some antique linen. So I'm just inking that up, inking the distress ink up. Just inking over that flower. So I'm using 2 colours here. I'm using the antique linen and the vintage photo. Antique linen, I just went over the whole thing. With the vintage photo, I'm just going to do the very edges of the petals. So I'm just going to adhere this down with a glue dot. Well, a couple of glue dots. Needs more than one. Okay, just to finish off this card now, I'm just going to do some faux stitching around the outside just to frame it. Okay, so that's today's card. It's quite a subtle card. The patterns, you know, it's really quite plain. There's not a lot going on. It's a sympathy card. They are meant to be quite simple. You don't want your message getting lost in a whole huge fuss and palaver on the front of the card. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye.